Hoo boy! Welcome back, everybody, to an all-new episode of Low Value Mail on this Monday, September 9th, 2024, the year of our Lord. I'm telling you, we will get to the bottom of it one day. Which Lord? Let me just frame myself up here. Okay. We got an exciting guest. This is episode number 119, for those of you who are keeping track. And this is actually a guest that I was trying to get on last year around this time. For whatever reason, I was unable to. And but we have him here for us tonight. Obviously, the 23rd anniversary of September 11th is coming up in 2 days from now. And we're going to be joined by Ted Walter very shortly. He's the executive director of the International Center for 9/11 Justice. Previously, from 2015 to early 2023, he served as the director of strategy and development for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and is the writer and director of Peace, War, and 9/11. Which, if you haven't seen that documentary, highly recommend checking out. I just gave it a rewatch today, but I watched it last year as well when it came out, and it's very good. It's very good. So, and I'll put a link below to how you can watch that. Before anything, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It's something like 20 to 30% of you who watch the show are not subscribed. Why? My theory, my current running theory is that you're a bunch of cowards. So that's in your hands. And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so by going over to patreon.com/lowvaluemail, MAIL, or you can just join the channel. YouTube assured me that the button should shimmer or something. For between $1 and $5 a month. Although on YouTube, you don't get the ad-free audio, but lots of you listen to the show. I'm sure you don't love listening to the ads that Spotify just inserts automatically. So for $5 a month, no ads. Good deal. And tonight, I'll read any of your super chatted questions that are real questions. Obviously, that you know who you are. Tomorrow night, we got an all-new episode of The Bathhouse live at 9 p.m. So check that out. I know it's literally when the debate starts. I was going to maybe not do it, but because I actually do want to watch the debate, and I'm not going to be able to because of this, but I can watch a replay of it. So hopefully you guys check that out. Hopefully I'm not doing this for nothing, and you're all going to be like, no, we're watching the debate. So anyways, we'll be back. We got a great cast. If you want to catch me live, I'm going to be in Baltimore October 10th and Tampa, Florida, Side Splitters October 20th. Baltimore is the Port. And Las Vegas at the end of September at Skankfest. If you don't have your tickets, I think it might be sold out. And and if you missed last night's episode of Crossing Streams is back. We did a new episode last night. You can get access to the replays on, I put the replays on a special channel. I have to delete them right away. I went and looked at the old channel because I hadn't done one in 8 months, and I had a strike on it already. So I can't leave them up on my channel. I just can't do it. So anyways, and that's a perk you get for subscribing to the Patreon or whatever. So without further ado, let's bring Ted on. And of course, as always, the phone lines will be open a little into the show once we chat with Ted for a little bit. Let me do this. Let me just unmute him, and bang! Ted, are you there? Ted,
I'm here.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this one because I last year around 9/11, I wanted to get you on, but for whatever reason didn't work out. And but we have you now, and I'm very excited. I watched your documentary, which you were the writer and director of. I actually saw that it premiered last year at the Westdale Theater. I grew up not far from there. I'm Canadian.
Wow.
I grew up not far from there. And I spent a lot of time in the Westdale area in Hamilton. So that was very cool. So Can you just tell people a quick just who you are and how you got involved with the International Center for 9/11 Justice?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, and I'm sorry that we didn't make it work last year. And thanks for following up again this year.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So I well, I'm 42. I was born in Wisconsin. I moved overseas when I was 15 with my family. We moved to Southern Africa, and then I moved back to the U.S. when I was 19, and it was 2 weeks before 9/11, and I moved to New York City. So basically, 9/11 was my introduction to New York City. Like I didn't really know what living in New York City without 9/11 or even living in the US as an adult without 9/11 was like. In a way, 9/11 just kind of took over my life at that point from being a 19-year-old all the way
Did
till
you live
now.
nearby?
I was in the Village. I was going to NYU. So yeah, I lived,
Oh, okay.
couple miles away from
Yeah, that's
from
very
ground
close.
zero. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I got everybody has their 9/11 story. Mine's not that interesting, but I walked outside of a building where I was. It was I think right after the North Tower had come down. There were literally just thousands of people pouring up Lafayette Avenue. You know where the public theater is, right there, St. Mark's, etc. So yeah, it was just thousands of people pouring up the street. The whole sky was covered in one side was covered in smoke and dust and everything. So yeah. And I guess that just sort of colored my entire experience of like, my very formative years in New York City. I was very anti-war, and I had sort of questions in the back of my mind about the whole event, but didn't really, I kind of at a certain point just started assuming that they had let it happen on purpose.
Early on, you
And
started assuming that.
kind of early on, yeah. I remember on the day thinking, how did a plane get all the way to the Pentagon, like almost an hour after the planes, hit in the Twin Towers in New York City. So I would have
So
figured they
you
would
do,
have been able
do
to
you believe
stop
that
that.
a plane did hit the Pentagon? Because we had Ryan Dawson on here, and so some people are like, there
Uh-huh.
was not even a plane that hit the Pentagon.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, just to jump right to it. Yeah, I would say I'm agnostic about it right now, and I'm doing my research. I've got good friends and colleagues that I respect and love on both sides of that issue. And we have a debated topics forum on our website where we have researchers that are debating it. Um, so yeah, I'm really getting my feet wet in that. I've been very focused on the demolition of the buildings for a long time, and as you mentioned, I left Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth early last year, and so I'm starting to study all these other areas of 9/11 more deeply, and yeah, so I'm undecided on that, but starting to read the literature on that pretty closely.
Yeah. And so you were pretty early on in this, and then I guess you figured that did you start the International Center?
So yeah, so I did various things in the 9/11 Truth Movement from 2006 all the way until now, and so I've had the center was originally started in about 2009. It was called the International Center for 9/11 Studies. It was started by an attorney named James Gorley from Texas. Well, originally from Oklahoma, but he was living in Texas when he started it. And he's just a couple of years older than me, so he was a pretty young guy when he started it. And they did like probably the most notable thing that the organization did in those early days was organize the Toronto hearings in 2011, also close to your home.
I was
But
living in Toronto in 2011. I'm too bad I
okay,
never
did
went
you
there.
did you happen to go by any chance or hear
I
about
didn't. No, no, no.
hearings?
I
Okay,
wasn't really into the 9/11 stuff until probably a little later than that.
okay,
Probably in 2011, I just didn't. I was probably like, I don't know. I didn't really think about it, to be honest. I would
okay.
think, but yeah, no, no, no. But I mean, obviously now I'm like, especially after watching the documentary with Graham McQueen. He passed away last year, and I highly recommend. Where's the best place people can watch that documentary? By the way, on
Well, you can find it if you just go to our website. You can find it very easily.
okay,
ic911.org.
okay,
Where it's been most watched is on Rumble on
that's where I
Redacted.
yeah on Redacted's Rumble.
Yeah,
So this is kind
yeah.
of unrelated, but it's just curious your thoughts. So obviously you and Graham McQueen, he was a religious this religious studies professor. Was that correct at
Yep.
McMaster
Mm-hmm.
University and
Yep.
in
Correct.
Hamilton? And so obviously you guys are anti-war. What are your thoughts? This is kind of unrelated. What are your thoughts on the fact that Dick Cheney is now endorsing Kamala Harris?
Well, I think it's I mean, many thoughts, mixed thoughts, but I think it's funny because I think if he wants her to, if he actually wants her to win, he probably shouldn't endorse her because I don't think he's helping her out in any way.
Sure. Like you think
you
that's
know,
actually like he thinks he's kind of sandbagging her a bit by.
I don't think so. I don't think that. I think he has no. I think he's probably like too arrogant to maybe realize that his endorsement of her wouldn't exactly help her campaign.
Yeah.
I don't know. But you know, I mean, yeah, I think it does show you where the Democratic Party is at this point. You know, it shows where the Republican Party is too. So that, you know, yeah, and I mean, it affirms why, you know, I have sort of progressive politics, progressive leanings, economically, socially, whatnot. But you know, I couldn't vote for, even though, and I'm not, I'm probably not going to vote, or I'm not going to vote for one of those two for president. I think they're the only two on the ballot in New York. But so anyway, it just goes to show, you know, it makes sense.
It just is a weird one that
it's weird, and it shows you.
Yeah, like where we're at with things, where everything seems to be flipping a bit, because obviously the anti-war movement was a very left-wing movement, at least it was, and now it seems like it's flipped a bit. So,
but I'll just say, sorry to interrupt you, but I it's hard for me to take seriously the anti-war positions of, you know, whatever gentle anti-war position Trump might have, or a Tulsi Gabbard supporting Trump, or RFK Jr. when, you know, they're supporting what's happening in Israel right now. They're supporting what's happening in Gaza. I don't see how you can be anti-war, call yourself anti-war if you're supporting what Israel's doing.
Yeah, so. It sounds like you're more of a libertarian now then. Not good candidates there though. Unfortunately, not. And I have firsthand experience with that. So let's get to the 9/11 thing. Okay. So I watched your you gave a presentation on this UK
UK column.
UK column, right? So are your main points of contention with the official 9/11 narrative seem to be the calls? Now in the movie, not to give too much away, but people can obviously watch it, but it very much puts the case that this was just a contrived thing as excuse to just go to war. They, you know, similar to Pearl Harbor, they needed some giant event, and this is essentially a second Pearl Harbor, and they just needed it. So, but your presentation was focusing a lot on the calls made from the airplane. So I guess just maybe explain that.
Yeah. So the center, I didn't finish mentioning that we sort of, a year and a half ago, after I left Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, I knew the people who had been involved with the center since those early days. And I said, let's reboot this thing, call it the International Center for 9/11 Justice, and let's start doing research into other areas of 9/11 that are not as well understood. And one of those areas is very much what happened in the skies, what happened with the airplanes, the hijackings, et cetera. Why were the airplanes not stopped? All of that stuff. Yeah. But I've been particularly interested in the idea, what I find a very simple idea that I think can resonate with the public more, and it has not been leveraged enough, is that the hijackers could not possibly have flown the planes. And a piece of that is they could not possibly have hijacked the planes. So my presentation, this is basically a presentation of mostly new research that I've done over the last 6 months to a year, drawing from some research that a few people did in previous years, but really this area hasn't been that well developed. And what I was basically doing in the presentation was arguing that the hijackings could not possibly have happened the way that we were told by the hijackers. And that argument traditionally has been made just in terms of plausibility. Like, there's no way these scrawny, 130-pound guys could take on these military trained pilots and with just little knives and overtake the plane without any sort of the plane going off course or any of the, and
with no pushback whatsoever. And
no pushback.
And listening to your presentation, and obviously I didn't know this, but there were multiple people who were just passengers who were trained in hand-to-hand combat. There was one guy who was could bench press 350 pounds or something. There were not this wasn't a group of feeble elderly people. Essentially, there were people who, and so, do you contend that they weren't hijacked, or that the planes weren't in fact hijacked?
Yeah. So the point I was going to make is that I think that beyond the feasibility argument, you can actually then really dig into the phone calls, and when you study the phone calls carefully, and not just how were they made, were they made with cell phones or airphones or whatever, but on what was being delivered in the calls, the information, that they don't add up at all. And I focus largely on Flight 93, but a little bit on the other flights as well. I can go into some of those details, but
yeah, please do.
Okay. But before I go into some of the details, the gist of it is if you really study the phone calls and what's being said, they don't add up. They actually undermine and refute the idea that, because the hijacking story is entirely based on what was in the phone calls. What we know about the hijackings, or what we think we know about the hijackings, was entirely given to us by those phone calls. That was the purpose of the phone calls. And if you go and dig into them, they don't add up at all. And so what we draw from that is that the phone calls were false evidence. This is like basically a technical legal term. They were false evidence that was actually disseminated during the commission of this crime, the 9/11 event, in order to like put out a story of what was going on in those planes. And that story was untrue. What was and I think, if you watch my presentation, I'll explain a little bit in this interview, we can show that. Yeah. What actually did happen. Me and my colleagues in the organization we're trying to proceed cautiously, right? But those calls were reporting fake events, and it was either the passengers and flight attendants, the actual named passengers and flight attendants who died on 9/11, who were put in a position or induced somehow into making calls, and they had a script in front of them or talking points or whatever, claiming to be involved in a hijacking. Or the calls, and this has been sort of the more traditional argument in the 9/11 truth movement, or the calls were made by impersonators, maybe using voice morphing technology to sound like the actual passengers and flight attendants when they called their loved ones, etc. And so it was just actors basically making these calls. And
did that technology exist at the time?
There's a little bit of debate about this and not a ton of information about it, but the argument made by some was that it could have been feasible. I think that the person who developed the technology and spearheaded the development of it said at that time it wouldn't have worked in real time to do it, right? To actually like speak into a microphone and just have your voice like instantly morphed into somebody else's.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's questions about whether that was the case. If you read carefully, like David Ray Griffin is the one who, really kind of, let's say, popularized the voice morphing hypothesis. His argument was he never made a strong argument saying, this is what happened. This is the hypothesis that I think is right. He only said like, this is the best hypothesis we have at this time. Right. That this is a viable, at least this is a plausible hypothesis. And he said, maybe there's a better one out there. I don't think he really considered the idea, and I read through all the stuff he's written about the phone calls, and there was other theories put forth, like it was done by the real passengers, and technology wise it was done by having some sort of a repeater on the planes that would essentially amplify what they were saying into their cell phones, and they were essentially tricked into thinking that a hijacking was going on in the plane, like a hijacking was being like staged on the plane but not really real. That theory in particular, I don't think makes any sense when you really read the phone call, like study the phone calls, because I don't think these people were tricked. And because I think if they were actually reporting real events, what they thought were real events, what they thought was a real hijacking, they would be way more freaked out, and there would actually be a little more. Have
you heard them? Are there actual audio trans?
Well, no, good question. So. Yeah, people that haven't spent much time thinking about the phone calls just kind of assume that they're all recorded, or that that most of the information we have about the calls comes from interviews that were done by the FBI with the people who received the calls. Right. And those interviews were like written up in not in transcripts of the interviews, but just, reported on. But there's a handful of calls, mostly voice messages, like 3 or 4 where we have a recording of the message that we can hear. There's one call that was like a real-time call between Betty Ong, she was like the flight attendant on flight 11 who made the first and longest call Flight 11 was the first one to be hijacked. That was 4 minutes of, allegedly 4 minutes of that was recorded. If you dig into the details there, you can actually figure out that more than 4 minutes was recorded, and it's basically a lie that there's only 4 minutes, and they actually spliced and edited the audio of that. That's a whole can of worms to get into. But so there's some.
Yeah, who did that?
Yeah, well, people at American Airlines, basically.
Right.
But to answer your question, you could tell the calmness of them is evident in the ones that you can hear, which there's a handful, and then many of the callers were reported by the people who talked to them to have been extremely calm. So like Ted Olson, the U.S. Solicitor General, spoke twice to his wife, Barbara Olson, and said, when he went on Larry King a few days later on September 14th, and said she was, in retrospect, she was extraordinarily, remarkably, just amazingly calm, So that was basically across the board. Like a majority of the callers have been described as being very, very calm.
And at this point where they're making the phone calls, like what's going on in the actual plane?
Well, so that's great question. It's like I want to figure that out too.
Well, I'm wondering, like maybe Larry King asked, and we actually have that information. Like,
yeah. I mean, well, are you asking me what I actually think was going on,
or what is purportedly
going
you
on?
think, or what was it? Both? What was purportedly going on, and then what do you think was going on?
Okay, yeah. So there's 4 different flights, so it's a lot to go through, and it's like each one is a little bit different. But I will say, since you asked about Larry King, and well, let me start with Flight 11, because on its face, Flight 11 is again the first one that Betty Young and another flight attendant named Madeline Sweeney talked about. But they're the ones who called from Flight 11. The scenario that they describe is totally ludicrous. Basically, Betty Young just basically says that 2 flight attendants in first class have been stabbed, and a passenger from business class, who his name was Daniel Lewin. Sorry, I'm getting the name wrong here, but I'm not going to get into the details of who he was, but he was stabbed in the neck. So you've got a passenger stabbed in the neck who's bleeding out and basically dies, and 2 flight attendants who've been stabbed, and mace has been released in the first class, business class area. And so all the passengers from first class and business class have come to the coach class part of the back of the plane to get away from all that. And according to Betty Young, nobody in coach class knew that there was a hijacking underway, that a hijacking was going on, as if all the people who were coming from the front of the plane wouldn't start telling everybody at the back, like oh my God.
Stabbing. I mean, mace would make it. It's like, it's not, that curtain's not stopping mace.
No,
getting in the coach.
Mace would get everywhere in the plane, and the people would be freaking out, and there'd be a guy there like squirting blood, and it would be chaos.
It'd be chaos.
And supposedly what Betty Young is saying to the people that she spoke with on the ground is that, the people in first class and coach class don't know there's a hijacking underway. They think it's just a medical emergency. And what that is covering for, in my view, and in the view of other people who have researched this, is the fact that there was only 2 people that made calls from the plane, when if this was actually happening and there are actually working seatbacks, phones in front of them, which is debatable. But if there were, that's how Betty was able to make her call, ostensibly. People would have been picking up the phone and calling their loved ones. So you would have had probably dozens of calls, and nobody's making these calls. So you've got that. And then on the front of the plane, you keep hearing Betty say, we can't get in touch with the pilots. We can't, the door is locked. The door to the cockpit is locked. We can't get in, which basically means that the other flight attendant who's trying to get into the cockpit is walking through business and first class, and she's not being stopped by any hijackers who are encountering her. Well, she's not seeing any pilots dead pilots on the ground. What does that mean? Does that mean that all 5 hijackers? She keeps saying, we don't know where they are, we don't know where they went. The guys, she keeps referring to them as the guys.
This is a domestic flight, right?
This is a domestic flight.
So it's like, and as far as I understand, the cockpits on a plane that's a domestic flight, like, it just seats 2 pilots and that's it. Like,
it's small. Yeah.
Like when you walk by them, like there's no room for anybody in there other than there's 2 seats and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
exactly.
And how many hijackers were meant to be in there?
5. So
5
we're being
plus the 2 pilots?
well, they don't state
like
that explicitly, but if you use some critical thinking skills and think about what they're saying, and they're able to get to the door and they don't see any hijackers and they don't report any dead pilots on the ground, that means that would be that all 7 of those human beings are inside the cockpit, and 2 of them are dead, and there's blood everywhere. It's just obviously it's all, it's cartoonish and ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like
so
a clown car.
Yeah, and then I came across this actually just relatively recently as I was preparing for the presentation. One of the FBI reports, one guy who spoke to the second flight attendant, Madeline Sweeney, he said to another woman, and this was reported in the FBI report, that Madeline Sweeney said that the hijacking, the atmosphere and the airplane was calm as the hijacking, took place. Like, I wish I had the words in front of me, because it's even more powerful.
I mean, it's hard to believe that everyone would be calm, because generally you're like, yes, there will be some calm people, but then there'll be some people who are like absolute wrecks who will then probably make everybody else not calm. Like, you can't assume that all people are calm. I'm just thinking about like my wife. Like, she'd be losing her fucking mind.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe a lot of hijackings, and they didn't happen that much like post 1990 or whatever. Like, they kind of got airplane security under control by then. But like historically, when all these hijackings happen, like if somebody is like stabbed and there's somebody like dying that's dead, like people are not going to be calm, and everybody's going to know what's going on. And she said, yeah, the hijacking, the atmosphere in the plane was calm as the hijacking was going on. So, and sure enough, yeah, all these callers were reported to have been extremely calm. So that's just flight 11 to give you an idea of what was supposedly going on the flight. Flight 93 is one that I spent a lot of time studying, because somebody had already done a really good analysis of flight 11. And with flight 93, you have so many calls. Those are the 2 where really you get the biggest window.
Those are the 2 planes that hit the towers?
No. Flight 93 is the one who crashed in Winston, Pennsylvania.
Field. Gotcha.
So they're the first and the last. They're the bookends, right? Flight 11 is the one who hit the North Tower. Flight 93 crashed in Pennsylvania. But they're the 2 that give us the biggest window into the falsity of the story, because there was so much time spent on the phone on those 2 planes. The calls from the other 2 there were fewer and they were shorter. But so the more time that people spent on the phone describing these fake events, the more we're able to like tell, the more data they give us to show that it's all baloney. So flight 93, you have like 12 different callers, 2 of them flight attendants, 10 of them passengers. And the big thing there is that you can, at 9, whereas with the other ones, it's sort of a mystery what happened, like that we don't know how long the struggle between the pilots and the hijackers was. With flight 93, the official story, in my view, made the mistake of doing some radio transmissions from the plane at 9:28 a.m., right? So wherever that is in the series of events, where you could hear the pilot purportedly saying, "Oh, Mayday, Mayday," and then like 30 seconds later, like, "Oh, Mayday, get out of here, Mayday, get out of here." And if you listen to that recording, it's almost a loop. He's like, "Mayday, get out of here. Mayday, get out of here." It's like repeated.
Yeah.
And so it sounds very suspicious. And then a couple minutes later, people start making phone calls, and none of them report this loud, violent struggle happening in the cockpit. The first thing that the first guy, Thomas Burnett, describes is, the plane's being hijacked. They just knifed the guy. Then a flight attendant calls a couple minutes later, somebody else, and says, a flight attendant has been attacked, but none of the crew or the passengers are injured. And it goes along, and basically you get to the point where you've got people that are reporting the hijacking now starting, people that are calling 15 minutes, 20 minutes after the hijacking allegedly took place or the takeover took place. And they're saying, oh, now hijackers are getting ready to take over the plane. They're getting ready to go into the cockpit. And then, so that based on, this Todd Beamer, the guy who said,
and how many people were in the cockpit of this one? Also like 4 or 5?
Well, the funny thing, you have all these discrepancies. So everybody that reported the number of hijackers reported 3. And the official story is that there were 4 hijackers. But the 2 key ones to really focus on are like Todd Beamer at 8:45 saying people are getting ready to take over the plane. And then the person who spoke to him said 7 minutes. She estimated that it was 7 minutes later that he said that they entered the cockpit. So that's 24 minutes after the takeover allegedly occurred. And then at 9:50, 22 minutes after, you have that same flight attendant, what's her name is suddenly escaping me, Sandra Bradshaw, call her husband, who's a pilot for an airline, talk to him for 8 minutes, and she tells him that she assumes that the pilots are still in the cockpit and in control of the plane, even though you got and that the three hijackers are just sitting in first class. And this is after a violent struggle that she should have heard or been told about, and after three other people who are sitting very close to her on the plane making these phone calls are telling us that the hijackers have gone into the cockpit. She's telling us something completely different. It's not as if they would be seeing different things.
These are small planes. Like I just looked it up. It's a Boeing 757-200. It's a 240 seat plane. Like
yeah, they're not terribly big. Yeah, you would, if there was a struggle in the front of the plane, everybody would know. If and
I mean, if someone went and blew up the bathroom, like you'd smell it at the front. Like it's
yeah. And it's inconceivable that a flight attendant, who has more of a responsibility to know what's going on in the plane and be like managing the situation, that she would say 22 minutes later, after other people are saying, oh, they've gone into the cockpit, that she would say, oh, I think the pilots are still in control of the plane. It blows the whole story out of the water, in my opinion. So I could go on and on with it. It's a lot.
Just nonstop.
Just nonstop stuff. Like, yeah. I mean, you've got this guy, Mark Bingham, who talks to his mom. The thing that people have focused on in the past with his thing was that he introduced himself as like, "Hey, mom, this is Mark. It's Mark Bingham." That he said his first and last name to her. Right. That's pretty weird. Okay, yes. And people took that to mean, okay, that means that this is an actor pretending to be Mark Bingham. Who knows? But I think the more important thing about his phone call is that when his mom asks him, "Who are they? Who are the hijackers?" He does not answer. And this is very descriptively written out in the FBI report. It's like there's a pause for 5 seconds and he doesn't answer. And then he says, "You've got to believe me. It's true." And then his mom says, "I do believe you, Mark. But who are they?" And then he won't answer. There's another pause for 5 seconds. She said that she can hear murmuring in the background, and then the line cuts out. So why is he? And he was sitting in first class. He was surrounded by the hijackers in first class before, before the plane was taken over. Why is he having so much trouble describing who these hijackers are?
Assuming you believe the hijacking narrative, why would the hijackers do that? Like, why would the hijackers make these fake phone calls?
Well, yeah, right? the hijackers are not making the phone calls. And that's another thing. Sorry to jump on you. That's another thing that does not make any sense about the Flight 93 story. Is that one of the callers, Jeremy Glick, he spoke to his wife for 20 minutes, and he told her that one of the hijackers told the passengers to start calling their loved ones. What type of hijacking would that happen?
Right. Like, why would they be concerned with that at all? Or want that?
They would not want that.
Yeah, they would not want that.
Yeah, and other passengers just described that as well. Todd Beamer, like the woman that he was speaking with said, "You should probably get off the phone now. Like it's dangerous for you to be talking on the phone." He's like, "Oh no, I'm totally free to talk. Not a problem." So
then I'm sure you talk about this with other people who are interested in this. Do you guys have like a best running theory?
There's the two theories that I already laid out, that it's either it's passengers of the actual named passengers.
No, I mean, who is behind? Yeah. Like, assuming that these are fake phone calls.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Were there actual hijackers? Is there a theory that none of these people were ever, like, all the people that we know of who are the list of hijackers? Like, is there? I believe that there's photos of them at the airport.
There's not much, actually. There's very little documentation of them being in the airports. I have not. There's so much under the sun to study, and I have not spent that much time yet seriously studying the evidence of whether or not they boarded the plane. It's entirely possible that there were people either those guys or similar guys who boarded the plane had no idea what they were going to be doing on the plane. What I know right now, based on the research I've done over the past 6 months, is that there's no way that the hijackings took place. So even if there were those 19 guys on the planes, there's no way that they hijacked the planes. If those guys actually had tried to hijack the planes, it would have been chaos. They probably would have been defeated by the pilots and the passengers. The pilots would have, put in the hijack code. They would have radioed air traffic control. Planes would have gone, like all sorts of chaos would have happened on probably most of the flights. None of the hijackings would have been that successful. If any of them were successful, there's no way that those guys could have gotten the planes all the way to New York or Washington, D.C. There's no way that they could have steered them, maneuvered them into the targets. So the whole story is a fairy tale.
Yeah, and there's
there's
a lot of pilots, obviously, who have corroborated that, saying essentially something similar. So then, I guess back to assuming that these are fake phone calls. Do you guys have any theories do you have anything kind of, floating around of what you might think this is? What happened?
Well, I mean, yeah. So there's really we as I said before, we're proceeding very cautiously. In terms of the calls themselves, they were either made by the passengers who were participating in a hijacking drill. They thought it was a hijacking drill.
Thought it was a hijacking drill.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And it was made by impersonators or some other form of fabrication of the calls, right? Like that. So that's regarding the calls. In terms of the flights, these weren't real hijackings. I mean, the theories that are out there, and I myself am very much undecided on this, but I would like to be decided on it within the next couple of years, is that the planes were remotely hijacked, like remotely taken over, using satellite technology, GPS technology. That
was
the
such a
pilots
thing possible? Is such a thing possible?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the ability to fly the planes remotely, without a doubt. Taking over the planes remotely, probably yes, in my view. And so the first theory goes that the planes were just remotely hijacked, and somehow they made it impossible for the pilots and the passengers and everybody to do anything. Maybe everybody was gassed as that was happening. Who knows? And then they flew the planes into the targets. With the other theory is that and there's probably more variations of this, but just two basic schools of thought is that that there were planes sort of like an Operation Northwood scenario where another plane flies up and like takes the place of the one that's flying with the passengers on it, so the plane swap theory, and so that different planes than the ones that took off with the passengers are the ones that hit the buildings.
But then what happens to the passengers in that scenario?
Well, in that scenario, that's a very, very dark. Not that, I mean, all of this is extremely dark. Blowing up buildings with thousands of people in it's dark. So we're already in a dark territory here.
Yeah, of course.
But the scenario that scenario means those planes are basically landed or crashed or whatever. Either maybe crashed or landed, with the passengers on them already dead, or they're taken off and taken somewhere and killed. That's the implication of that.
That's essentially implying that that's the government doing that.
Yes. Yeah. The government or some sort of very, very covert, when we say the government,
I mean, Congress, that's not Congress. Yeah. But people who are in positions of power in this country who are meant to, I guess, be representing people's best interests are doing things like that. All right. I'm gonna open the phone lines up because I imagine other people have questions. Someone actually in the chat says, this is from Sean from Pittsburgh. He says, Flight 427 left actual debris and bodies. Did 93, were there bodies? For
Flight 93? What's Flight 4? Let's Flight 427, by the way.
I don't know.
Just some other example.
Flight.
This is yet another area, and there's so many that I've read a little bit, and
it was from Chicago O'Hare to Palm Beach in 1994.
Okay,
was a crash.
Yes. So there's a lot of debate over whether what crashed in Pennsylvania was actually Flight 93, and whether people were on that plane. The named passengers were on that. People. Again, probably the dominant view is that there was no plane there. It was just kind of a hole in the ground. Some people do think that a plane actually crashed there. Reportedly remains, and I have a colleague who've done a lot of work on this actually, and does believe that, well, the remains of the people were found there. So if those people were on a different plane or somewhere else, they were brought there, if that's the case, or they were just on the plane that crashed there. But we do have to contend with the fact that, as far as we know, remains were found there. They either ended up there organically because the plane crashed there, or they were brought there. One thing that I will say that I think is a pretty, for me, is a hypothesis that I can say that cuts through the question of whether or not these calls were made by the passengers who were on different planes or different locations, or it was this voice morphing technology. From having studied the Flight 93 calls and knowing what I know, and I don't stand by that many things that firmly, but I stand very firmly by the fact that there was not a real hijacking on those planes. These calls were reporting fake events. If that's the case for the hijacking, then clearly the actual supposed uprising of the passengers at the end of the flight was also part of the script, right? And that, because to coordinate that many people or that many actors to make those phone calls describing a passenger uprising, like, you didn't just do that on the fly. That was part of the script. And so this is in a way a novel argument, but because people think, oh, Flight 93, it was meant to get all the way to Washington, D.C. and it just crashed too soon. I suspect, it's my hypothesis, that however those calls were made and whichever plane it was, that Flight 93 was always meant to crash, that the perpetrators of 9/11 wanted the last plane to actually crash so that they would have a story of passengers rising up and, fighting back. And there's a powerful propaganda aspect to that you don't get if just all four of the planes actually reach their targets. And it also gives you a little more sense of realism if one of the planes doesn't actually succeed in its goal and it crashes.
I was just gonna say, if everything was done almost too perfectly, then
So I think just from people don't think. Unfortunately, people haven't thought a lot about the phone calls, and when you think really hard about what it would take to write that script and implement that this had to be scripted, that didn't just organically happen like all these calls. It means that the latter part of the script was also planned. It had to be planned. It didn't just happen on the fly. So that was the goal, was to have the fourth plane crash and have this story of the passengers rising up.
Yeah, so we're not talking about a minor conspiracy here then either. Like, this is obviously, in order to pull something like this off, this is required.
No, well, we're as soon as we're like, sometimes people are a little like blown away by these elements of the crime, but we're already talking about 2 skyscrapers with thousands of people in them being blown up, and years probably of planning and months of implementation, at least, of rigging those skyscrapers. So we're already there. So these other elements to me are not a leap. They're totally in line with the rest of that in terms of scale.
Okay, let's take a call here. We got one on the line. One moment, please, while we bring him in. I don't know who we got here, but we'll find out in a second. And if you're on the line, just stick in there. We'll get to you. Hello, you're on Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, it's Charlie from Florida. How you doing?
Charlie from Florida. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So yeah, I was in school when it happened. I remember coming out of class, and the teacher was like, in the saying that everybody was in the cafeteria watching TV when it was just happening. And I was in Florida. I'm in Florida, but I had family that were in the city when it was going on. So we went into the cafeteria to watch the TV, see what was going on. And the first one had already hit. There was no footage of the first one that hit. It was just there was just a big gaping hole in the first tower, the North Tower. And then everybody was watching the TV, and when they were watching, around 9:03 or something, was when the second one hit. And then when the second one hit, everybody's like, "Oh shit, this is real. This is crazy shit. Something's really going on here. We're being screwed with massively." So my kind of on the I've thought a lot about all the different types of things that people have said, since that time about what couldn't have happened. And I guess my theory on everything is more like, and I could be wrong, I don't know. My theory is basically like that my theory has always been that the planes actually did, the stuff on the planes did take place, but that people in our government, corrupt people, colluded with people overseas, maybe, or just knew that some people, shady people in power, knew about what was going on and they just didn't stop it, or they didn't take it seriously, or I don't know, maybe that's one of the theories that you've heard.
Yeah, you want me to answer that, Danny?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess one way to refer to that theory just generally is like calling it the lie hop theory, or the let it happen on purpose theory. Which and that's kind of where I was in the early days after 9/11, maybe in the first few years. And I think my argument is that if people had just done nothing, that our defense apparatus would have worked. At some point it would have worked, and it certainly would have worked. I don't, starting from it would have probably maybe detected some of these people before 9/11, but on the day of 9/11, I don't think that as I argued before, I don't think any of these hijackings, maybe one or two, but not 4 for 4 of the hijackings to be successful. Definitely not. And this is what my organization is in the process of researching and producing literature on. Definitely not being able to fly the planes all the way to their targets. And then, again, if nobody if they just let things happen, I mean, there's two versions of that. There's doing nothing and just seeing if the planes reach their targets. I think if that had been the case, the planes would have been intercepted. The air defenses would have worked. So there had to be actual steps taken to make sure that the air defense system did not work. And it goes on down the line. And when you get to looking at the buildings, and I've spent 15 years of my life just studying the collapse of buildings and trying to educate people about it. The buildings were demolished, and then I could spend a couple hours giving you the evidence of that. Building
and that was
7,
that was the main thing with the architects and engineers for 9/11. They were essentially, that group was like coming at it from a engineering standpoint, saying this was not possible.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of literature, the journal. So within the International Center for 9/11 Justice, we have the Journal of 9/11 Studies, which is a part of it. And the Journal of 9/11 Studies has produced a lot of, the key literature, key papers from the early days, 2006 to 2011, on, the demolition of the buildings. So clearly that had to be done. That didn't just happen. So I understand where you're coming from, of suspecting that. And I just encourage you to take a good look at all the evidence. And I think my view is that if people look at the evidence with an open mind, they'll realize that, sadly, unfortunately, like all of this was an operation, false flag event intended to launch the war on terror, and bring us the permanent war, bring us the massive enlargement of the national security state, and all the rest. So surveillance, etc.
Right. Yeah, I just have one other question. I watched some of the documentaries on the. Is that okay? Can I just have one more question?
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I watched these other documentaries about some of the flights. I remember seeing I watched one on Flight 11 and the second one that hit. And I don't know if you watched any of those, but the second one, there was, I remember specifically, they were talking about this phone call that this guy made to his dad as the plane was descending rapidly, like towards the end. And it was, I don't remember the guy's name, but he was on the phone with his dad, and his dad was in New York or New Jersey watching TV, and he was on the phone with his son. And I remember he was like asking his son, like, what was going on. And his son was like, oh, people are throwing up on the plane. People are flipping out. The plane's making jerk react, like jerking around. Like it feels like it's coming apart. We're going really fast down. And then he said something like, I remember like specifically, this was weird when I was watching it. Like he said, I think the hijackers have control of the plane, and I think they're intending on taking the plane and flying it into a building somewhere in Chicago. And
Yep.
and then he said like, oh, but don't worry, Dad, if that does happen, it'll be really fast, and stuff like that. And then he said at the very end of the conversation, it was like 9:00. That's when the second plane hit. And he said that his son got really quiet all of a sudden and just said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then the phone cut out. And as it cut out, he looked on TV and saw the second plane hit the building at that exact moment.
Yeah. Hey, your recollect, that's Peter Hansen's call to his dad.
Peter Hansen, that's it. Yeah.
And your recollection of it is very detailed. That is like you're literally like reading the words that I remember like reading from the FBI report on the call. And yeah, there's it's hard to glean a lot from the Peter Hansen call by itself. It's when you kind of compare it to the two other callers, the calls that they made from the plane, that you start to see things that aren't consistent in what they're reporting. But
right.
there's and I'm just putting this out there, the timing of the call, according to the records that were produced by the airphone company, GTE, actually has the call from when it started to when it ended would have been ended 13 or 14 seconds after the plane hit the building. So kind of read into that what you will. Maybe it would take some time if it's hit the building to disconnect or whatever. But there's
right.
At least on the face of it, there's a discrepancy there. Some people might argue that he was too calm given the situation he was in.
Mm-hmm.
The call that actually does not add up at all in terms of what the plane, what he was talking about people throwing up and nose bleeding is like, in a way, if it wasn't true, like that's pretty well scripted to go with what was, because the plane was descending very, very rapidly and was getting closer to New York City. But you had the other guy who called from flight 75, 175. His name was Brian Sweeney. He was a fighter pilot during Desert Storm. And he's on this plane that has turned around over New Jersey and is flying back towards New York City. And he's having the second call. The first call he left a message for his wife. Second call, he's talking to his mom, and he says, it's like nothing that crazy is going on the plane. And he says, "Oh," she said, "Where are you?" And he said, "We're somewhere over Ohio, I think." This is a fighter pilot. This is like the highest trained, most knowledgeable pilot there could be, and he's like somewhere near the coast flying over New Jersey and close to New York. That clearly he would have noticed the kind of how much the plane had turned. He would not think that the plane is somewhere in Ohio. It couldn't even gotten to Ohio by that point if it had continued on its original path. So that one doesn't, like, he would have actually told his mom, if he, like, in my view, if he was reporting real events and the plane was like, it was real, he would have been like, "Oh my God, we're descending super quickly. And I see that it looks like we're flying along the coast. I think we're headed towards New York City. And like, it's like really bad." And he probably would have gotten up, and as mom had said in her, like when she was talking to the FBI, he probably would have gotten up and tried to like take the plane back from the hijackers. So
and they had box cutters and knives?
Yeah, knives. On most of the planes, it was reported that they had knives. And then on Flight 77, Barbara Olson, the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson, reported that she's the one who's responsible for the report that there were box cutters. So not, and like small knives, because they had to be able to get them on the plane. They were too long. That's kind of the 9/11 Commission report implies that the knives were relatively short, like under 4 inches. I feel like I wanted to say something else about that, but weird, like Peter Hansen did say something weird in one of his two calls. Like he said that the hijackers had a gun or something like that. And that happened in a few other calls. And that's just totally implausible that people, now maybe somebody could be mistaken and think that they have a gun and they don't actually have a gun. But anyway, so you also, last thought on Flight 175, since you brought it up, you had an unidentified flight attendant also make a call and say that both of the pilots were dead. I find it hard to believe that Peter Hansen and Brian Sweeney wouldn't also report something to that effect, given the amount of time that they spent on the phone with their parents, if the pilots were actually dead. So you have things that don't add up.
And wasn't there something about Dick Cheney? Like, he could have scrambled jets or something to stop the one and he just decided not to?
Yeah, it was crazy. The documentary that I saw, they said that they did scramble jets, but that the jets went the wrong way. Like, what? They went like out to sea, and instead of go to New York, they went, for some reason, there was a technical or some sort of whatever. There was miscommunication or something, and they ended up going the opposite direction of where the Twin Towers were. And so they didn't reach it in time. That's what the documentary said.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah,
really fascinated in the documentary. Like I did, like, you know, I was fascinated in just learning about this because it's such a crazy thing, obviously, that happened. So that, and they also said something about too, like the second plane, I guess they would have the passengers on the left side of the plane because the plane banked at an angle coming into New York City. So the passengers all on the left side of the second plane would have had a clear view of what was happening. Like they said the last minute of the flight, like all the passengers on the left side would have seen the towers and would have seen exactly what was happening and going to happen. So they would have probably all been I would imagine been flipping out and calling, like saying, oh, there's one tower on fire and we're headed towards the city. We're going right into the building. I mean, that's what I would
think
imagine.
one person would be like, maybe this is I can prevent this.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if they saw it. You know, like
maybe they're resigned that they're going to die, but they're like, maybe I can save hundreds or thousands of people's lives.
Yeah, a major aspect of why the hijacking story doesn't make sense is the passengers being so passive on all the planes. Like, oh, you know, like, and let's not be misled by the idea that, oh, the passengers like rose up on Flight 93. Like, no, on all of these planes, like so part of my presentation I gave yesterday, that Danny referenced, was that on when there have been very few incidents in history of like violent hijacking attempts where people were they've also been violent, but where people try to remove the pilots from the controls. When that happens, the pilots fight back, and the passengers and the flight attendants usually get involved in helping the pilots apprehend the hijackers. So I just don't think that you know, but certainly if it got to that point where Flight 175 is like, you know, hurtling towards to the Twin Towers, towards New York City, like, yeah, people are going to like get up and start fighting back. But I don't even think it would get that far.
Yeah. Well, thanks for answering my questions, and thanks, Danny.
Appreciate it. Thanks for calling in. All right, let's take another call here. We got a lot of you waiting. I will get to you. Just stay on the line, everybody. We will get to you, I promise. Next call up coming from Pennsylvania. Hello, you're on the line.
Hey, how you doing, Danny? Sorry, I was muted there for a second.
All good.
All right, so
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Paul. Paul from Pennsylvania. I've called in a couple
Paul?
times with different aliases. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying?
All good.
I just have a couple questions.
Yeah, go
like
ahead.
I appreciate the kid that. Well, he's not a kid, but he's an adult now. But I appreciate him calling in and saying about his feelings on. Like it's kind of weird. I'm glad you're like posting something like this now because there's a whole generation that really has no fucking idea what happened at that point.
Sure.
You know, it's a strange world how quickly we forget about a lot of stuff. But anyway, I'm not going to give you into my story. I paid attention to it, and I worked at an IT company at the time that was severely affected by it. But why
in what way?
It's just phone support.
Oh, gotcha.
Nothing major.
Okay.
I don't know. A building. There was a whole node that was held at the top of the World Trade Center, and as soon as it fell, like all of New York lost connection.
Right.
So everyone was a little pissed off at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot of calls, you know.
Right.
But you know, they were using the Blackberries that we sold underneath the rubble and texting people the way like, yo, I'm here. You know, you remember that, right? Blackberry blew up after that.
Yeah. So go ahead.
That was a long time ago, man. 2001. Holy shit.
I know. 23 years.
Dude, I have no idea how fast it went. You know, and we're still dealing with the same bullshit, by the way. The same fucking lies, the same cover-ups, everything. Why now? I understand it's September 11th. But there seems to be a lot more truth, a lot more focus on these calls recently. You know what I mean?
What do you mean? No, I don't.
I'm just curious of, really?
Are you asking like why I'm having the guest on right now?
Things? Well, no. I'm just asking, there's a tension right now towards those calls. Like a severe,
the phone calls.
The phone calls. The phone calls. Yeah, I mean, because
like
I will say
calls.
you are, Ted, like probably the first person who's kind of focused on the calls that I've seen. You see a lot, you know, everybody focused on the buildings. Like it's all The buildings fell. It seems to the to the untrained eye that obviously they were just demolished. Everybody's watched TV shows where they
but
demolish
nobody's paying it.
buildings.
Nobody's bringing that back up. Like, I'm on Reddit and stuff, like Conspiracy Commons and all those places. You know what I'm saying?
And you're saying
like,
nobody's talking about the phone calls.
No, everyone's talking about the phone calls. Everyone's ignoring the obvious other facts. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Which are what?
Which are the way the building fell.
Well, I think that was the first
molten
one.
Steel falling down the building.
But people have been talking about those things
one.
for 15 years, about the molten steel.
Well, I mean, why have we stopped? Why are we trying to change our connection? I mean, we should still be trying to promote loose change and everything like that. Loose change is the biggest eye-opener on this whole thing that you could ever watch in your whole time.
Sure. Thoughts on that, Ted?
I agree completely that the demolition evidence is fundamental. And like, if you're trying to wake people up, I think like the whole 9/11 story is incredibly complicated. I think like why I gravitated towards looking at the demolitions is because the evidence is actually incredibly straightforward. It's scientifically overwhelming. So I completely agree, Paul, with focusing and continuing to focus on the demolition. And in terms of my outreach, my personal life as well, like that's probably the first thing that I will talk about with people. I also think it's important for us to like, develop a better understanding of all the other aspects of what happened that day. And some of those things might actually hold a lot of promise for waking up more people. I do feel that, focusing on that idea that the hijackers could not have flown the planes. Like, I think that's a pretty similar to the demolition evidence. I think is like very straightforward.
Was there really planes though?
Well, I believe there were.
Some people on the ground didn't see a plane. If they didn't see a plane and then they saw the explosion, that plane was going very, very fast.
So wait, are you saying that
I saw the second plane? I remember that vividly. I was working second shift. My daughter was just born. My mom was. Never mind.
Yeah, but so you're saying that there weren't planes?
You say you saw the second
people
plane
on the floor that were on the ground at the time did not see planes.
Well, New York City's, but if you're in New York City, especially that area, like it's tons of tall buildings.
I agree.
And like obstructive
sightlines. I know it's hard. Yeah, exactly.
You might not
but
necessarily
you may have heard it. If you're hearing a jet airliner at that level, aren't you going to hear it? I mean, it's going to be late, of course. Of course, it's going to be late because of So I don't know, man. That's sketchy as shit.
Yeah. Anything else?
Well, yeah. I mean, my position is that there were planes that there were, hundreds of eyewitnesses reported the planes.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the videos. I think the plane.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I look. I'm. If somebody has a really strong case to make, I'll listen. Like I'm a proponent of not being so fixed in your views. There's only, as I said, there's only a few. I do know that the buildings did not collapse due to the airplane impacts and fires, and I know that the hijacking events reported on the planes were not true. But beyond that, I try to keep an open mind.
And I think maybe the more the more questions you can raise, maybe some people will start being like, some people are maybe
there was some. I don't know what outlet. I don't know if it was in Loose Change or not, but there was some outlet that said that those airliners went to a specific airport. Those calls were allowed to be made, and then they were just gassed. I don't know.
That was on an actual mainstream news said that?
That was I think it was Loose Change that said that.
That one I don't remember. I know Loose Change had the early kind of reports of Building 7
maybe
falling before it
Zeitgeist.
did. Yeah, maybe.
It kind of melds together.
Yeah. Okay, anyways, I gotta take some more calls. I'm gonna let you go.
Yeah, you're right. All right. My bad. Have a good day, man.
All good. Thank you for calling in. Let's go. You know what? We're gonna talk to international comedy sensation Matt Rife. It's not actually him. But let's see if he can unmute himself. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if there's other frontiers of kind of questioning that you can do. Hello.
Hello.
Hey,
this
up?
is Matthew Rife. Not
Matthew
comedian,
Rife.
just the joke.
I know. People might know you from Twitter. Matthew Rife, how's it going, man?
Hey, it's going good. I just have a quick question about this. This is very interesting. Kind of crazy because I've never heard this theory before. I'm sure it'll settle in. But Building 7, I have heard two different things, and I'd like to know your input on it because I've heard, it fell down or whatever. But there was a firefighter that was his ladder that he worked in that part of the city. And he told me that there was something about, he heard the official story was they had to demolish that building the next day because an engine from the plane landed on the roof. So if you could fill in anything, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that there was probably my gut reaction to that is that it doesn't sound like a very realistic idea. But
just to clarify one thing, it was the same day that Building 7 went down.
It was So it was the same day, like late 5:20 in the afternoon.
I may have said second day is my guess.
Yeah. But I think what I think that is a product of is that there was a lot of chatter about the fact that Building 7 was going to come down. And some people and this was reported on MSNBC within a minute after it came down. Lieutenant David Restuccio of the FDNY said we had heard reports that the building would either come down on its own or it would be taken down. So that idea was floating around, among the emergency personnel who were down there. And certainly it certainly makes sense to me that somebody in the fire department would have heard, they had to take it down because the engine landed on the roof, or they had to take it down because it was structurally unstable. There was all sorts of stories going around, about the building, that the fact that the building, the idea that the building would come down soon, either because people would take it down, or the story was that, it's structurally damaged, it's going to collapse soon. So that's what I think that was a product of. But none of that would have happened if there was a normal sequence of events. The reason why, I suspect that the building was supposed to go down when the North Tower went down, which was the second of the two towers to go down. And in the cloud of dust or whatever, Building 7 was also supposed to go down. And then something happened, it was botched. And then they had to figure out the rest of the day how to take it down in a way that made sense. And they had to start putting out a cover story.
Does it not need to be like pre-wired? I can't.
So it was pre-wired. Yeah. You couldn't wire it in the same day. So this idea when Lieutenant Restuccio is saying, it's going to come down on its own or it will be taken down, it couldn't have been rigged in one day. So I suspect that it was supposed to go down earlier in the day. Something went wrong. And so they took it down later in the day. And so they started around 11 o'clock, just like half an hour after the second tower went down. There started to be reports of this building is structurally unstable. It's going to come down. An anonymous engineer around noon says the building's going to come down, has about 5 hours left. That's a totally preposterous prediction to make 5 hours, that in exactly 5 hours, this building is going to come down, based on there being some fires.
As an engineer, there's literally no way they could have lined all that out, wired it up, set explosives or anything. That's the reason I said the next day. I thought it was the same day, but I didn't want to sound retarded.
Yeah.
But have you ever heard of the motor falling?
Heard of that idea of what the engine being on the roof or something?
Like an engine basically falling out of the plane.
They were told.
Yeah. No, I've seen like sort of reported like the engine lying on the sidewalk, and like you can see something flying from one of the planes after I think it hits the second tower. You can see like something. Yeah, it's the second tower like flying away. It's like engine whatever. I'm not aware of any report that engine hit Building 7 or landed on the roof of Building 7. So, and I suspect it's not true, but I wouldn't say for sure.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys.
Cool. Thanks for calling in. Appreciate it. Okay, let's take another. I got a question from the chat. This is from Jay Weatherford. Have you ever had a discussion with Ryan Dawson regarding this? I believe he's on Jimmy Dore right now. I don't know if that's what he's discussing though.
I've never actually communicated with Ryan Dawson. I wasn't even that familiar with him until a few years ago. And I think my view, and Danny, I watched a little bit of your show last year with Ryan. I guess he came in because I didn't get back to you in time to be on the show.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And, you know, I
Showed
think
up
Ryan
like 45
has,
minutes late.
yeah, yeah,
He was in Korea in his defense, or Japan or something.
yeah. I think Ryan generally has the right ideas about who was behind 9/11 and why. Maybe puts a little more emphasis on Israel or Mossad than I would, but generally has the right ideas about it. I think but I think, as I said to you, Danny, I think that Ryan is unfortunately really mistaken about the instrumentality of the crime, the actual events. I think he believes that the buildings, I think he says, fires could totally account for, the buildings collapsing the way they did. And he, on the Pentagon, as I said, I'm agnostic, so I don't, but he very, sort of unfortunately kind of arrogantly just dismisses questioning these really like, who knows what he would say to my presentation. I would love to know what he would actually say about my presentation if he actually watched it and studied it carefully about the phone calls. I think the instrumentality of the crime is important. We do have to focus also on the culprits and who did it, and all of that's important as well. And Kevin Ryan, a member of our organization, wrote a really good book called Another 19 on that. But you also got to focus on the instrumentality. You don't just, if you have a murder, you don't just like look for who was walking around the building and who had the motives. You actually go in the building and get the body, do the fingerprints, do the autopsy. So, and I think Ryan, unfortunately, is totally off on how the crime was carried out, and figuring out how the crime was carried out is part of figuring out who did it. So
yeah.
But
Okay. Oh, that's a good answer. Let's take another call right here. And if you're on the line, we will get to you, but don't call in too late because there's a lot of people waiting right now. We got a call coming up from Texas, I believe. Please, I don't know where you got to press to unmute. I think it's like *6 or something. All right. Hello, you're on Low Value Mail. Hey, what's up? Who are we speaking with?
Hey, I was wondering, I remember when this shit happened, I was like debating some people about because I used to be like, man, there's no way the government did it. If that were the case, there'd be an uprising, whatever. Boy, was I wrong. But
I mean, most people just believe the narrative. I mean, even in the documentary that you guys made, Peace War 9/11, I had never heard this contention, but it was made by Graham McQueen, that essentially Pearl Harbor was allowed to happen and was almost like, I'm not saying it was the government did it, but they essentially set up the circumstances that allowed it. They essentially allowed it to happen so that they could.
Oh yeah, I believe that for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, there's so much propaganda. There's so many blockbuster Hollywood movies where you watch these and they're the biggest movies in the world, like literally the Pearl Harbor movie, and you're just like, I love the government of America. I was not even from America, and you're like, they could do no wrong.
Right. And little do we know, we were lied to our whole lives. But
sure. And then also, what are they lying to you about right now?
Right. No, yeah, it hasn't stopped. It hasn't even slowed down. But what I was gonna say was, who all had the most to gain off of it happening?
Ted?
Who had insurance policy for the buildings? I heard that got renewed shortly before it actually happened.
I mean, defense contractors probably started a 20-year war. Man, that made a lot of people really, really rich, I would think.
For sure, the aftermath was a factor, but I remember there was a huge
the guy who owned the World Trade Center, I believe, had an insurance policy on it. But that I don't know. Ted, can you speak to this?
Yeah, Larry Silverstein, the leaseholder of the Twin Towers, he took out the lease, just a few months before 9/11, and took out this insurance policy, for the towers being destroyed in an act of terrorism. You collected something like $4 billion, So I think that's one. I think there was a desire to bring down those buildings for that. There was billions of dollars of asbestos abatement that needed to be done to the buildings. I think also, but that's a secondary. I would argue that's a secondary motive of okay, we want to stage some sort of really massive terrorist attack to just completely again, just have
I mean,
a complete
surely
paradigm shift.
Yeah, like Larry Silverstein wasn't behind 9/11, but he might have known somebody who
No.
was the orchestrator
Yeah.
of it and was just kind of
He probably got pulled into it, kind of would be my guess.
sure.
But yeah,
you think
so
he had knowledge of it prior to it happening?
I think it's more likely than not that he had knowledge that it was going to go down.
Or he's just
But
the
that's
luckiest guy in the world that his towers.
Also, I
happen to be
remember
insured.
hearing like senators and congressmen were telling like friends of theirs or whatever not to fly that day and stuff, like before it had happened. And another thing was the elevators. I heard like a brand new elevator company came in to revamp the elevators and stuff like 8 months prior to it happening. And that's like where the frames of the building would be, right? Like to where if you wanted to wire up some thermite and stuff for it, that'd be ideal, right? Like
Yeah, so that was Ace Elevator that did the elevator modernization. You also had a lot of fireproofing upgrading happening right on the floors of each tower where it was hit. So there's a lot of opportunity for planting thermite, nanothermite, also maybe planting homing devices for the planes potentially may have been used and put there. So there's all that. But to go to your original question, I think we're talking about a sort of a conglomerate of interests, but you're talking about the military industrial complex. You're talking about, the just people, geopolitical, like, zealots like Cheney and Rumsfeld and so on, who want to expand the American empire. You're talking about, oil and gas companies. You're talking about, surveillance, wanting to expand surveillance and really, restrict civil liberties.
The Patriot Act was definitely a major motive.
Yeah. So I think it was to I think it was they wanted a revolution in terms of the way that society was structured, and they wanted a permanent war state. And things were not tending quite in that direction at that time in the 90s and early 2000s.
What a crazy thing to do. All right, caller.
Yeah,
I gotta let you go. Thanks, man.
No worries, brother. Later, bye.
Take care. All right. Let's take another call. Everybody, please hang on the lines. We will get to you, I promise. And thank you again, Ted, for coming on. This is,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Thank
very
you.
Cool. Very cool. Hello. You're on Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Holy shit, I never get picked for nothing. I've been waiting online so long, I don't even want to talk no more.
Can you speak up, or I don't know if you have a headset in, but you're kind of muffled.
I got it on my... Yeah, no problem. I got it.
Okay, you sound great.
Damn, why aren't we fighting these some bitches already? We got a pretty good idea who's fucking us over. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cuss.
You can cuss. This is just on YouTube and Rumble and Twitter and stuff.
I'm
Cuss
trying to
away.
watch YouTube on the same phone I'm trying to call you on. This shit's difficult. I'm 15 seconds ahead on the phone call and
Yeah, there's a delay.
tripping. Yeah, I was
But
like
go-
10 years old when this shit happened. I was in like the 3rd or 4th grade, living in Whitney, Texas. I was at the dentist office about to get some teeth fucking filled with cavity shit. These sons of bitches come in over the radio talking about it. I was a little kid by myself in the dentist office listening to it on the radio. Like, holy fuck. I was gung-ho. I was ready to go to war until like 2010.
I mean, I think a lot of people
I
were.
was,
I mean, it really,
yeah, I mean,
as divided as this country is right now, it seemed it was probably the opposite the day after 9/11. Like, probably nobody cared about their politics. You were just Team America.
brother, we were all looking to see what was going on in the neighborhood, checking out, making sure everything's,
Yeah, which is, I mean,
I don't
that's
know,
a
we all
known
had our
thing
eyes
that
more
if everybody
open to,
experiences
like-
a trauma together, you kind of bond over it, regardless of your differences. So, do you have a question for Ted?
yeah, I was wondering, is there like a 3D video of what happened that day? Like the way they did Trump's assassination videos, where they reimagined it with like the computer? Do they show you where the planes took
I
off
mean, I
from?
imagine the engineers
there's-
must have huge models that.
But have we seen that?
Like
Is there a
simulations,
video?
essentially.
Is there like, a simulation type of a video the same way they did Trump shooting? Because I don't ever remember seeing one. I figured that'd be like a priority to, on the day, reimagine the situations in which all the planes
I
took
imagine
off.
they exist now, but go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're talking about the planes aspect of it, and people have,
and even
there have been
recreating
some
situations inside the cabin. I mean, if we have what they say is information, let's put it all together. And if what we have that they say is what doesn't add up, obviously they're fucking full of shit.
Well, there's the United
I mean, we all know
93.
they
There
are
was
anyway.
a United 93 movie. Have you ever watched it? I've never seen it.
No,
I haven't seen it. Yeah, I'm gonna watch it soon. Now that I've done all my research, I'm
Flight
gonna.
93.
I feel sorry for the people that wrote that script and they had to like try to piece together a plausible story out of what they read and all the.
I'm curious if all the phone
propaganda.
calls. Yeah, well, it probably is propaganda. It came out in 2006. Probably like that's the height of the war.
Yeah, see, I wasn't interested in watching that in 06. That was a different time. We were all partying our asses off in 06.
Yeah. But go ahead,
Ted. To answer your question, I've seen some like visualizations of the flights. There is FDR flight data recorder data from two of the flights, or at least it's reported to be from the two flights. Some of my colleagues think that the data from the FDR data is totally valid and authentic. And so there's some of that. There's also some computer simulations that have been done of Building 7 by people at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Dr. Leroy Halsey.
That's the one. Yeah, I did see that. That was There was like an hour and a half or 2 hour long documentary. I've seen that footage, like that video of Building 7. There's no way in hell that building fell because there was an office fire. They got us fucked up to think we'd believe that shit.
I mean, probably most people do. Probably most people don't even have an opinion on it, to be honest. Like,
exactly. That's exactly right.
That's the thing. Is like most people, if you stop someone on the street, they're probably like, I don't know. It's just
I always have to remind myself.
Most people don't even know that a third tower fell. Most people think it was just the two.
Yeah.
I have to remind myself, like, only 1 to 3% of our patriots that claimed the United States and fought for the 13 colonies' freedom, only 1 to 3% of that population was even willing to fight against the British to claim America. So you got to imagine 330 million plus 120 million illegals. There's going to be a little bit of discrepancy as to what's going to happen with the government.
Yeah. Ted?
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And
I'm having a big problem down here in the South right now. Nobody seems to want to talk to each other. I don't know.
Yeah,
a lot of people have moved in and caused like another different type of strife to where our neighbors aren't even neighbors anymore.
Yeah. You want to let Ted answer?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Just in terms of your original question, I agree that like simulations and visualizations can be really useful for figuring out a lot of this stuff. One idea of simulation that we're interested in doing, that we want to do in the next year, if possible, is to get in a flight simulator, get a bunch of pilots in a flight simulator, and try to recreate some of the the maneuvers that were done in some of the planes. This has been done a little bit in the past by different groups and different pilots, but not really well documented and not done in like a rigorous sort of like study format. So we'd like to do that. I think we can show definitively that even experienced pilots cannot do the things that these planes did on 9/11 with that type of study. But yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. And I at some point, I don't know. You got me thinking about the idea of even trying to somehow simulate what's going on the plane with the people and the hijackings, but
possibly.
I mean,
just like a movie.
You could rent out one of those like fake Instagram things that like fake influencers use to take photos. Like they pretend they're on planes. Maybe get something like that. A bunch of actors. All right, thanks, caller. I gotta let you go. Thanks, man. All right, let's take another call here. All right, I got some questions from the chat. A couple questions from the chat from you very shortly. We got coming up. Who's this? One moment, please. Man, if only there was a way to just unmute people on my end. All right. Hello, you're on Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, what's going on, fellas? This is Dylan from
What's up, man?
Wisconsin.
What's
Your
up, man?
neck of the woods, if I heard correctly, right, Ted?
Yeah. Hey,
You
Dylan.
said you're from Wisconsin? What's going on?
Yeah, originally
Do you
from
mind if I
Madison.
ask which part? I missed that part.
Yeah, I don't think I said Cross Plains and Madison, so Madison area.
Oh, okay. I'm over in Milwaukee, so
Awesome.
Wisconsin boys.
I just wanted to I don't know. I guess there's so many things. Oh, well, I just want to kind of push back on like the victims of the hijackings responses. Statistically, and I'm pushing up my glasses like a nerd, statistically, I mean, hijackings have been happening since the 40s, airplane hijacking. Peaked in like 70s, late 60s, early 70s. Virtually no deaths. I mean, there are some outliers, but no deaths in any of these hijackings.
Canada actually did have one, Air India, I believe in the early 90s, late 80s.
With deaths?
Yeah, because it's considered.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Yeah, that's on the chart. There are some. I'm not saying there aren't any. I mean, 2001 was definitely a peak in this set of data, but when you compare the amount of hijackings to the amount of deaths, there's a huge
of course. I know what you're saying.
And this is because I think people like the hijackers usually landed in another airport, and the victims didn't need to fight back. There was no need because they weren't at risk of dying. I mean, they're at risk of dying, of course, but I mean, like, that's not what the goal of the plan was.
Mm-hmm.
But 9/11 is kind of different because this was planned by people like Ramzi Ben Al-Shib, the guy who planned the 93 bombing, and they planned a thing called the Bojinka plot, where they actually did intend to use planes as weapons, as opposed to prior hijackings where that wasn't the purpose. Like even Ramzi Ben Al-Shib, he just went on a Japanese flight and left a shoe bomb on the plane, and then he exited the plane. So he didn't hijack that. So there's evidence of these guys actually intending death on planes, not just using the planes as leverage for something.
Yeah. So,
and also just to push back on the fact that I hear a lot of these guys couldn't fly the planes. Well, some of these guys studied engineering in Hamburg, Germany. It's not like these guys were just like, they're not as dumb. I mean, they were not as dumb as me. I'm certainly a lot stupider than a guy like Muhammad Atta.
Yeah, but I'll say, like,
crazy.
my dad's an engineer, or was. He's retired, but he can't fly a plane.
Did he ever go to flight school?
No. I mean, I guess what they're saying is the
Muhammad
limited.
Atta went to flight school in Florida. I mean,
I guess
do you know about Rudy Deckers, who smuggled drugs?
No. Well, Ted, maybe answer this, because obviously you probably know more about, the amount of flight school training they received versus the difficulty and what they did. So go ahead, Ted.
Yeah. So on the first point, you are right. The most hijackings, 99% of hijackings in history, this is a guesstimate, but based on my research, the hijackers do not intend to kill the pilots or take control of the plane. They usually kind of are taking the plane hostage and getting the pilots to fly somewhere. Sometimes in some percentage, it's not a tiny percentage. There might be some deaths on the plane because things.
Go on. I'm sorry. Go on.
How big?
But I'm just saying you're right. It's not a tiny. I mean.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I would agree it's not. It looks like 20. I am agreeing it's not like I'm not saying it's negligible.
Yeah.
I'm saying there are deaths. Definitely.
Yeah, and especially So and longer ago, in the height of it, late 60s, 70s, as you mentioned, for sure. But and that was sort of the 9/11 Commission's argument for why these hijacking attempts were successful. Is like, oh, pilots are trained not to counter what the hijackers are doing. They're trained to go along. They're trained to de-escalate. They're trained to acquiesce to the hijackers' demands, because 99% of hijackings have been that way. And the best chance of keeping everybody on the plane alive and not crashing is to just do what the hijackers are asking, and then depend on people on the ground or whatever when you land to take care of the situation. I was interested in figuring out, but to me that seemed left this thing open and say, okay, they're not trained. They're trained to like de-escalate. But what if somebody comes in the cockpit and is actually literally trying to kill them? Or we're literally trying to remove them from the controls of the plane. Like, how are people going to behave in that situation? And so I went through and studied the hijacking history carefully, and I found this is what I presented in this presentation yesterday. Although I had to, because I had a certain amount of time, I had to skip through the actual detail of each of these case studies, but it's all in the PowerPoint, which I'm going to put up tomorrow on the website. When it comes to a quote unquote suicide hijacking, or a situation where hijacker try to remove pilot from the controls, people end up, the training goes out the window and the pilot starts fighting back. The pilot, like in none of these situations, ever gave up control of the aircraft willingly. They fought, and then so both pilots get involved in fighting, and they start in many cases they call in they use the intercom to ask the passengers and flight attendants to come help them. Naturally, people get involved, and in all of those cases, in the cases where a gun was not used, they managed to stop the hijackers from getting control of the plane, or at least keeping control of the plane. And the plane was ultimately landed safely. And there was a lot of other things that occurred in those situations. Usually the plane went off course dramatically. In some cases, in about half the cases, they were able to contact air traffic control. And so when you then compare that to the 9/11 situation, yes, you do have you have more hijackers than just one, and they do have knives. However, none of those things that you would expect to happen actually happened. Like there was no, like, amazingly, out of the 19 callers who made 28 calls, nobody actually reported any sort of struggle between the pilots and the alleged hijackers. There's no reports of the pilots asking for help. There's no reports of any of the planes going off course, except for Flight 93, which just dips 600 feet. But that's not consistent with a plane actually going off course because there's a struggle in the cockpit. So none of those things happen in this situation. It's pretty weird. And then I encourage you, go watch my presentation and really understand what was reported in those phone calls. I really strongly believe that any open-minded, rational person who actually reads what was reported in those phone calls will come to the conclusion that they were not reporting real events. I believe that strongly. In terms of the other point you made, what was it about them being able to fly the planes? I mean, we have dozens and hundreds of pilots making the case that even they could not perform the flight profiles that were performed on 9/11. Even they could not fly at almost 600 miles per hour, and which is what the UA-175, the second plane, that's the speed it was flying at, and hit the second tower and actually maneuver it into the second tower. When you study the footage of how that thing goes in, it makes this little bank a few seconds before it hits the tower. If it had not made that precise amount of bank at that precise moment, it would have missed the tower by a few hundred feet, right? And there's no way that really any human being, but let alone highly inexperienced, novice pilot, is going to be able to know exactly how to make that bank at that moment to hit and account for the amount of wind, crosswind, because if the crosswind had been different, it would have also missed it. In my view, that shows that it was computer flying that plane, and many pilots. Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of for the people who are they did the training? What kind of planes were they trained on? Like these purported hijackers. Like, I imagine not Boeing.
So mostly
not commercial planes. Definitely not. No.
Yeah, they were trained. They did their training in Cessnas, and then they did have at least three of them are reported to have some time in a simulator of a Boeing 757 or 767 or maybe 737, but a Boeing, like a larger jet. However, very little time. We're probably talking about less than 50 hours, if that. And again, this is one thing that we wanted we want to nail down really clearly is what their reported level of training and proficiency was. But for Hani Hanjour, the guy who allegedly flew the plane into the Pentagon, the Flight 77, I mean, he does this 330-degree descending, accelerating turn. And then that's not the hardest part. That's hard. But the hardest part of it is that he ends up then perfectly in line to hit the Pentagon and manages to like level out at, he's going over 500 miles per hour and levels out and like manages to not hit the ground and goes like straight into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Pilots have tried to do this. Pilots have tried to do this in simulators, can't do it. There's not a single pilot in the world who's really studied this who said, yeah, I could do that.
I mean, I flew like a Boeing, like a jumbo or whatever, large commercial plane in a flight simulator once, and I just constantly crashed it.
Can I say one more thing, Danny?
Yeah,
I'm not debating. This isn't a debate with Ted. I just want to quote my favorite 9/11 researcher, Daniel Hofsicker, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I have an unforgettable image of a man dangling out a window on an upper story. He was soon to be dead. I was grateful not to see a close-up of his face that would show whether or not he already knew it. He was someone just like me, except I was at home sipping coffee, and he was getting ready to leap to his death. I just want to highlight that these are actual human beings that died. In all instances, none of this, my little bro flew a drone into the tower. Real planes, real people. And that's it.
Yeah.
But thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, man. And I think that's at the heart of what you're going for, is that, you know, you're trying to find out who was actually responsible for this. You know.
Yeah,
these were actual people. And, you know,
absolutely
not even just the American, but all the military soldiers who died, all the people who died via the military overseas. So there's a lot.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with the caller. And, you know, that is largely, I mean, we're doing this for the whole world. Like the whole world needs to understand, but we're doing this also for the victims and their families. And we work with many 9/11 family members. We're working with a family in the UK right now to try to open a new inquest into the death of Jeff Campbell, to try to get a proper investigation into how he died in the North Tower and what was the cause of his death. Because right now the official cause of his death is that it collapsed due to the airplane hitting it, and his family knows the truth, and they want the official cause to be changed and to be acknowledged that it was a demolition. So we're working with that family and dozens of others.
And when you make these requests, like what kind of response do you get? Like from governments?
Oh man, that's a long story, but the process to get a new, so when somebody dies in the UK in an unusual death, they have an inquest it's a fact-finding investigation just to figure out the proximate cause of death, not who did it and all that, but just what was the cause of death. And so there was an inquest held for Jeff Campbell and 9 other British victims in 2013, whose remains had been repatriated to the UK. And it was a totally like, is a 2-hour hearing for the 10 victims. It was very superficial, and they just like wrote, oh, cause of death, he was in the North Tower, the plane hit the building, caused it to collapse. And now the family is saying, we want a new inquest because we have evidence that counters the official finding. And so this process to get a new inquest is actually supposed to be very simple. If you have any new evidence that possibly calls into question the original inquest conclusion, it's supposed to be like, you know, easy, you know, have your new inquest. And also if you have proof that there was an insufficiency of inquiry, which there was in this case, because the coroner basically said what the coroner wrote, that the building collapsed due to the being hit by the plane. There was no evidence heard during the hearing to show that, nothing. So it should have been open and shut case to reopen the inquest, and yet the British government took 2 years to review their application, and then came back and rejected it. We showed how the decision was unlawful, and the family was threatening to sue, and they withdrew that first decision a year ago, and then issued a new decision 5 months later in January of this year. Same BS, rejecting the application again. And so now the family is actually going to sue and going to be filing their application in 2 days. And we think that we're pretty optimistic that they're going to withdraw the decision again, because it is actually so unlawful, and this should have been settled, 3 years ago when the application was first submitted. So that's how they're reacting, is by breaking the law to not allow this family to have a new inquest.
And I imagine the bureaucrats behind that are like, man, if we allow this, what a shit sandwich this is gonna, like, Jesus. I mean, they're like, what? So we have to start investigating the United States government. I got a question from the chat. This is from Maximilian. It says, please ask Ted about Judy Wood and the idea that the building turned to dust. And he says also there were no planes ideas saying that they were holograms. Do you know about this, Judy Wood? You know who that is?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Judy Wood puts forward the idea of directed energy weapons were used to destroy the towers. The main evidence for that is the total pulverization of all the concrete, and they argue, I believe, as well, that a lot of the steel was sort of evaporated, or even the steel was pulverized. And I would just say, I think that the explosives and now thermite, in my view, account for all of the damage that was done to the buildings. I think the concrete could have been pulverized with explosives. And I have yet to hear sort of like a plausible way that the directed energy would be used to destroy the building, and the sort of the process that you see it actually come down. The evidence of thermite is overwhelming and irrefutable in my view. The chemical evidence, the molten metal pouring from the South Tower, etc. I will always, as I said, try to remain open-minded. What I know for sure is that the buildings did not collapse due to the airplane impacts and the fires. And I think that's the most important thing that I think we all agree on, right? Is that something else, the buildings were demolished in some way.
Yeah.
And so I find the energy, the sort of negative energy, I'm just being frank now. I find the negative energy, regardless of whether it's true or not, the directed energy weapons were used. I find the negative energy that goes into making that case and going against nanothermite or against explosives is just really misplaced. The point here, we all agree the buildings were demolished. The exact technology of the demolition is not all that relevant, actually, if we think we have irrefutable evidence that they were demolished and that the fires and the planes could not have caused it.
Yeah.
It's wasted energy.
Yeah.
And divisive.
Okay, let's take another call. Also, phone lines are closed, everybody. If you're trying to get through. Hello. You're on Low Value Mail.
Hello.
Hey, what's up?
This is Patrick.
What's up,
All
Patrick?
right. I've got a few questions, so I'll try to be fast. Okay, first question is a bit of an icebreaker. What are your thoughts on the Maui fires?
Yeah, I've actually spent zero time looking into that or thinking about it, so I don't have any thoughts on it. But I mean, other than it's tragic, it's horrible. No, yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm totally open-minded to the idea that it was some sort of direct energy weapon or whatever, intentionally done. I'm totally open to it. Just haven't spent any time looking into it.
Okay. Second question. Do you think that because of the docile nature of the passengers on the planes that drugs or specifically MK Ultra could have been involved?
I would definitely not rule that out. I don't say I would. I don't say I necessarily believe it, but I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't rule out something being done if the passengers are the ones to have made the calls and to have which is not settled in my view, and we're still looking at both hypotheses. But if that's the case, perhaps there was something done to kind of make them more, malleable in their behavior. Let's say, to get them to go along with making phone calls as part of a hijacking drill. Somehow the passengers were induced. If that's the case, if they did make the calls, they had to be induced to do it somehow. And it's because a lot of people, when I present this theory to them, think oh, there's no way that the passengers would go along with it. You couldn't get people to do that. So, I don't agree with that. But I think maybe something was done to get people to be more pliable.
Yeah, some kind of explanation.
But who knows?
Yeah. Anything else, caller?
Okay. Go ahead. Real quick. Two quick questions. The next one, someone mentioned earlier, Occam's razor.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts?
In what regard? Just that what are you saying? Just that the simplest explanation is just what they're telling us?
Yes, the simplest explanation based on the facts that we know.
I mean, I personally, like, I didn't really, from my perspective, like, until the Tower 7 thing and, like, learning that it was like, oh, there's just a fire on the roof and then the building came down. You're like, how, you would never expect how does a fire on a roof cause a building to collapse in, like, what appears to be a controlled demolition? So I don't know if Occam's razor really even applies there, but Ted?
Yeah, I mean, well, it has to be it has to be the simplest explanation that actually applies to the evidence. So the evidence is that these 3 buildings were demolished. The evidence is that, inexperienced pilots could not fly the planes. So you have to apply Occam's razor to those evidence or those findings. So I start with what's the simplest explanation of that, and I personally feel like I've touched on it a little bit in this. So yeah, that's my answer to it.
Yeah. All right, last question, quick, because we got to get to some other callers here.
Last question. How long have you been a Fed?
All right. Thanks, man. That's a lot of people always just think everybody's feds. I did have one guy who used to be an FBI agent on the show, so I think since then. All right, let's take another call here. I don't think a Fed would say that the government was complicit in 9/11. Hello.
What's up, Danny? How's it going?
What's up, man? Conspiracy extremist. Everybody.
Hey, yeah, conspiracy extremist, your favorite extremist. So about the one thing to add to support the argument about the hijackers being retarded and not being able to fly planes is one of the dudes is I might be a little off in the exact details, but he failed twice in, I forget what state it was, but trying to like get his pilot license. I believe he went to one place, they failed him. He went to another place, they failed him, until he finally found an Israeli pilot trainer who passed him and said he was like the best ever.
And this is to fly a Cessna.
Yep.
Cessna. Yep. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So that, just to give some specifics so other people can look it up if they want to. That's Hani Hanjour, the guy who allegedly flew Flight 77 into the Pentagon. And that summer he was in the Washington, D.C. area trying to rent a Cessna, and he was denied rental of a Cessna from one flight school. And so he went to this other one that this guy, a former IDF soldier, Eddie Shalev is his name, went up in the Cessna with him and came back and said, oh, he's great, he can fly. And then he was interviewed by the 9/11 Commission, and that is the only account that the 9/11 Commission provided of any sort of flight instructor saying, assessing Hani Hanjour's flying ability, when all of the other flight instructors that actually worked with him said that, would have said that he couldn't fly. So,
yeah.
And then
Eddie
Shalev took off.
Yeah, he just took off. Yeah. Okay.
So my dad, he had a pilot's license. He flew Cessnas just privately, and when I was a little kid, I remember him saying like, "Oh, I was like, can you fly a commercial plane?" He's like, "No, absolutely. There's no possible way I could. It's a completely different beast." So there's another thing on top of that. So what's interesting, you mentioned like the remote control possibility, right? You touched on that.
Yep.
So I think we know like a lot of technology, when it's created, we don't see it for many, many years later. It's not commercial, or it's not, it's not public. So I was looking up, there's a flight technology company called IAI who has been spearheading like remote control information. Have you ever looked at like maybe who could have possibly, or what technology it could have been, or any information on the remote control aspect of it?
Good question.
Yeah, great question. I'm not very well versed in sort of the specifics of the technology, but I would recommend that you go to the Journal of 9/11 Studies on our website. So again, IC 911.org, and you go to the Journal of 9/11 Study section. There's 3 papers from a guy named Aidan Monahan who presented at our symposium yesterday. But one of the ones that you'll find right there on the main page of the journal at the bottom is the plausibility of GPS guided, remote control or whatever of the planes. And he really goes through in pretty detail, and I think provides a lot of. This paper is from like 2008 or 2009, so this is not brand new information. But he lays it out pretty well what the capabilities were. And there's another, besides what he put in that paper, there's another thing called like the flight termination system that was developed by a company that I believe was headed up by Dov Zakheim, who is sort of one of the PNAC members, Project for New American Century, that some people have argued could have been used to remotely fly the planes. So you could look into that as well. Dov Zakheim flight termination system.
Cool.
Very
Anything
cool.
else?
Last thing. So we know that the 2 towers and then 7 and 6, so 4 towers besides the Pentagon were hit. There were 2 planes that hit the towers. One hit the Pentagon, one crashed. And are you familiar with the one that was grounded?
Which one is that?
I don't know the flight. I don't remember the name of the actual flight itself, but from what I've heard, there was that day. I don't know if it was like right after the towers got hit or what, or they caught them. But there were people that were arrested, and a flight was grounded with people that were affiliated with the people that the other hijackers allegedly. So
I vaguely
interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting because you got 5 planes and then you had 2 tower 1 and 2, and then 7 had to be like basically free fall, and also 6 was destroyed too. So there's 5 targets, and they seem to be 5 planes. So sounds like it's pretty darn orchestrated to me.
Oh yeah, I mean, no, it doesn't seem like a question about that. Yeah, not at all. All right, man, I gotta go. We gotta get these
later.
calls. Thanks, man. We actually just one quick question from the chat. This is from Logan. He says, if I recall, there was superstructure improvements done to the Twin Towers in the months leading up to the 9/11 event. Is that are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that's sort of the elevator modernization thing. Yeah, that I think we mentioned before. It was within the year before 9/11. I'm not sure, but if you think in the year 2001, pretty sure. So yeah,
right. And that could have been basically a way that they could kind of rig it up in advance, because you'd imagine something like this would take years to plan.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would think so. Yep.
Okay. Let's take another call. We're going to wrap this up shortly. Thank you again for your time. I do appreciate it. And if you're watching watching the show, please subscribe to the channel, like the stream. Hello. You're on Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yo, what's up? Hey, yo.
Cool. You gotta make it quick though.
Quick. Just one thoughts on Marky Mark and 9/11 commemorative coins, and then I'll get to my serious question.
Okay. Marky Mark famously said that he would have stopped all the I mean, he probably would have been under whatever the drugs that they were all on. Marky Mark would have been calling his wife and saying like everything's cool, and just a very calming. He thinks so, but I mean, there were like literally, trained military on these flights, like trained in hand-to-hand combat, and they didn't do shit.
Yeah, what did Marky Mark say? He would have been able to stop the hijacking?
He went on like some Tonight Show or something, or he said somewhere where essentially like if I was on those flights, I would have stopped them.
I mean, look. I would.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Ted. No, let Ted go ahead.
There you go.
I think he's actually sort of making the point that I'm kind of trying to make, which is that I think a lot of the passengers in a real hijacking situation would have stopped the hijacking from helped stop the hijacking from actually being successful.
Yeah.
So
good point. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Real question, because we got to wrap. We got a couple callers still, and I got to wrap this up.
So my question was regarding. So the only thing I got about Flight 93 was the air traffic controllers who worked at that airport from where those Air National Guard F-16s are sent up to interdict it. All they said is, when they were questioned about it, they said those jets landed without ordnance. So I'm just wondering, like, how does an unarmed jet, force a plane to land? Also, these Haji fellas, they were partying down in a strip club in Florida, right? Before they carried out their whatever fucking deed.
They were at. Some of them were at. Yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, where those strippers at? Like, what's their name? And did they have a preference? Did they like the Latinx? Did they like the dark skinned one? What
I don't think that's pertinent, but yeah, good question. Did they ever interview the strippers? I did comedy at a hotel in Fairfield, Connecticut, like 6 months ago, and famously, one of the hijackers stayed at this hotel. And their only request for the show was, please do not mention that, because someone bought the hotel and rebranded it, and they're trying to like distance themselves from 9/11 as much as possible. So they were like, please do not bring this up. All right, Slav, I'll let him answer. You can just listen off air. Did they talk to the strippers?
That's a good question. I don't know. Look up Daniel Hapsiker in his book. One of your callers mentioned Daniel Hapsiker before. He's the investigator who did the most work on the lifestyle of the alleged hijackers before 9/11. The what we know about their lifestyle is totally incompatible with the idea that they were devout Muslims. So everybody should know that. It is well known, but everybody should know it. But I don't know if Daniel Hapsiker or anybody else has actually spoken with strippers that
Right.
hung out with the hijackers.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Okay. All right. 2 more calls, and we're going to wrap this up. If you're calling, make it brief. Subscribe to the channel. Like the show. Check out Ted's website. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
So, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello? Oh,
Yep.
great. So your previous callers touched on this, but the reason that I was calling was because I was American Airlines flight attendant prior to 9/11, and our training was comply. And historically, as your previous callers had stated, historically it was more of a negotiation situation. So it made sense at the time that everyone complied because that was the training. What really threw me off and made me question everything was the recovered passports that seemed to survive all of the structural steel meltdown. Yeah. So that was all I was calling to mention, was just those 2 things, that, like, one that made me think it was plausible, and the other one that made me think, well, this seems like a bunch of baloney. So,
right. All right. Well, yeah, that's a good. Thank you. That is a good little piece of information. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly comment.
Callers.
I'll just say thank you for that. No, thank you for that. And like, I totally understand where you're coming from. And from having studied now the history of hijackings, I think, my sense is that sort of changes as soon as the hijackers are literally attacking the pilots, trying to take them away from the controls, that things just suddenly go into a different realm.
I imagine that if I was in that situation, maybe my behavior would have been different. But like at the time, hearing that they complied didn't go against what we were taught. Yeah. So it made sense, like that everything was happening so fast, and you just fall back in an emergency situation on your emergency training. And so in that mindset, it seemed logical that perhaps they didn't fight back initially, but like you're saying, like if it gets to a point where you're like, okay, this isn't going to work and this isn't negotiations, now we're going to fight back, that doesn't make sense. And so it really is this thing where the mounting evidence not only makes you question everything you've been told, but it also just makes you just lose total faith in all of your sources of information.
Yeah. And I have a question. Is there any
scenario... that was the same thing twice. But,
I agree. Is there any scenario where pepper spray could be let off in the first class section and it wouldn't make its way to the back?
I can't imagine one. I mean, like it's a enclosed environment. It would be like saying that the stink bomb only stayed in the front class.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's going to migrate. I none of it makes sense. And I think that there was so much fervor in the beginning. It was just like, this happened and this is what we know. And this was at a time where we still trusted our media.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. People were
So
very interested.
there wasn't like, for the most part, people really believed what they were being told. I mean,
yeah.
It's heartbreaking to think about like the propaganda that we've been served over the years, and to think that this was part of it. Nobody wants to believe that.
Yeah, but it's
Let me just quickly say.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just quickly say, if you I can't remember your name. But if you would like to, I just encourage you to go to our website and watch my presentation. And if you feel that you have could add anything, any input or feedback, I'd be happy to hear it. Because I'm still, as I said in my presentation, I'm learning new things every day about this whole question of the hijackings and the phone calls. So, yeah, I'd appreciate that.
I mean, I had already resigned as a flight attendant by that point, but while I was a flight attendant, like that was just standard operating procedure. Like you knew if there was a situation like that, you complied. Because historically it was just a negotiation, and then you would land and everything would be okay.
Yeah, like every movie.
So it made sense in the story that we were told that they complied. That made sense because that was protocol.
Yep.
Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Thank you, caller.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Appreciate you calling in.
Thanks.
All right. Let's get through these calls. One moment, please. And that website again is ic911.org.
Yep.
Okay, check it out. Hello. You're on Low Value Mail.
Hey.
Hey, how's it
This
going?
is Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar.
Thanks,
Fake Bob
Danny.
Lazar.
Thanks, Ted. And I just want to ask mainly about Flight 77 and like which calls, because you're the call guy, right? So which calls like came from which planes? Is that part of your? I haven't been able to watch your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of your presentation?
Yeah, so there were two people that made calls from Flight 77, Renee May, who was a flight attendant, and then Barbara Olson, who was the wife of Ted Olson, the Solicitor General of the United States. And Barbara Olson made two calls reportedly. There's also other calls, like there were two other unidentified calls made from Flight 77 that were unidentified. But all the trail of evidence of people that received calls from Barbara Olson, the operators that spoke to her, Secretary Ted Olson, it seems like two calls from her got through. So we're talking about three calls from two people. And do you have a question about them?
Interesting. Well, I just sort of believe your like Northwoods type spoofing the flight data recording or whatever it's called. I think you're on something with that. Because in like my idea, it's like 4 real planes left the ground, 2 were diverted, 2 went to New York. That's my idea. You know what I'm saying? So I think you're onto something with that, and I do appreciate you. If you could tell me any more about like Pentagon evidence, because I just don't believe that Flight 77 hit it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and thank you for that. And I want to emphasize that, like, right now, as I said in the beginning, like we're proceeding very carefully and cautiously with developing our evidence and exploring these hypotheses of, was it the original planes that were remotely hijacked? Were the planes swapped, et cetera? And I'm right now completely open-minded, agnostic on that. Other colleagues of mine have firmer positions one way or the other, but I'm pretty open-minded about it. And as I said before, I'm also open-minded about what hit the Pentagon. You can actually go to, in addition to the Journal 9/11 Studies, we have the Debated Topics Forum on our website, which is where things like what did or did not hit the Pentagon are, where we are asking researchers to submit their material and we publish it. And it's not as heavily edited. It's just kind of more lightly moderated so that we can let the researchers have at it and debate these questions about the Pentagon, et cetera. So you can find that ic911.org, Debated Topics Forum. And there's some interesting papers there about the Pentagon, and there will continue to be more papers published there. So
cool.
Yeah, you can find the Pentagon there.
All right. Thanks, caller.
Thank you, Danny. And shout out James Corbett.
Yeah. Shout out James Corbett. All right. That has been the show. Thank you very much, Ted, for coming on here. Where the best place for people to find you? Just your website?
Just my website, ic911.org, or on X. It's, you can find it ic911 if you search for it. I have my own personal one too, but I don't use it as much. So yeah, ic911.
Okay. Well, I'll put it below so people can go check that out. This was very illuminating. Any last words? Go ahead.
Yeah, and put the Rumble link to the Peace War 9/11. That'd be awesome too.
Yeah, I'll put that as well. People could highly recommend checking that out. It's really good. And
thank you, Danny.
Yeah, Graham McQueen, great Canadian. I always wondered too, like him doing all this 9/11 conspiracy stuff at like McMaster University and like some religious.
You knew of him before. I
didn't know. No, I only knew of him, but I know McMaster University. Like I used to hang out there all the time. I was actually on 9/11. I was at Westdale High School, at the high school in Westdale. So, anyways, but just thinking of the type of people who are like administrators and teachers there, and then there's this guy in the religious studies class who's obviously like from an anti-war standpoint, but starts going off on all this 9/11 conspiracy stuff. I imagine that probably wasn't super well received.
It's a long story. I'll tell you about. He did retire just before he started doing all the 9/11 stuff.
Oh, okay.
But hey, you're in the New York area, are you not?
Yeah, New York City. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm up in the Hudson Valley. So.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, not far. Yeah. All right, everybody, that's been the show. Please subscribe to the channel. New episode of The Bathhouse tomorrow night, and definitely go check out Ted's website. That is all. I'll see you tomorrow night. Later.
Thank you.
Empathic abilities, yeah, my face be also stoic. Bleep blow up, nigga. That just means I'm working. They see me as a leader, so that's why I'm Captain Kirkin. These charts from the stars, that much is for certain. You can fit his hit if you up or if you hurt. I'm raising my stock, not talking my feet in some Birkin. Number Johnny 5 got a fucking short circuit. Bring the track to life when I spit phenomenal. When I hit, she feel that shit in her abdominals. These rappers make me laugh like comic view, they comic through. You know I got a ball out, I hit the track running just like Sonic do. They don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, they was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, and they tried to down me on some KO type shit. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, now we pulling up fresh on some flight shit. Ha. They don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. They don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, they was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah, and they tried to down me on some KO type shit. Yeah, they don't want to turn on my light switch. Yeah.